That sounds great, Mark. This is not your forte, but since we're talking about mussels, why are the mussels in the Flint and not in
Milky? I will find out.
why are they so prevalent? And they're more prevalent now. I bet they're usually dead, but they pile up more on my yard than they did 30 or 40 years ago. 40 years ago. We got some places. You used to see some live and floating by, and we used to have big ones. Remember those? You ever seen those big ones? We don't have any of those anymore. We got a lot of little ones. One of those is invasive, right?
It is.
Is that the zebra mussel?
That's one of them, yeah.
Yeah.
But I know somebody that can answer that question.
Now, if you want somebody to come from WRB to speak about mussels, we can.
Yeah, we might want to do that.
Future.
I'm not really sure. You might want to do that. It might be good to hear. Because I think it's important when you're doing something, especially like that picture you had there that you're talking about natural, not non-invasive.
Correct.
I mean, not invasive, non-invasive species. So we got a lot. Do we have lunch for everybody?
Yeah.
Do we have enough for everybody?
Yes, sir.
Well, there's a lot of people here today. I appreciate y'all coming, but we just have. Yes, go ahead.
One question for Mark. Mark has been doing this, like I said, from day one. And I remember I was pretty close to day one. And back then, during the first ag forecast, I believe that was more Jim Hook and his team. But the saying back then, when we first started work planning, is an estimate of 20% growth in the regions for ag. And over the planning horizon, which would take us to 2040, and just looking at more slides, we're at, I think it was 23% in this region. Are you seeing that type of, so obviously we're way ahead of schedule. Is it like that everywhere? And if so, because we're 93% efficient in the Flint, it's pretty darn efficient. At what point does the efficiency, the most crop for the drop, balance with the growth? We would love to have growth in the more crop for drop, but if we're already so efficient and we're seeing 23% growth rates, or the growth rates that maybe you can speak to in other places, where do you see us in 10 years? What are we looking at maybe in this region as sort of management practices, potentially new or maintained?
Yeah, I mean, I think farmers do a really good job at getting water from a source to a crop, right, with very little waste.
Right. Cost them money.
For sure.
That's one thing people don't remember.
It
cost them money.
It is not free to pump water. So we've seen really good, improvement there. And what the next 10 years, 25 years looks like in terms of improvements in genetics and drought-resistant crops, and there's all of that stuff that's all wound up into this. And to do originally those 2040 forecasts and I miss him terribly because we worked together for so much, but what Dr. Hook did when we were working together back in 2010, okay, what's going to happen in 2040? Who knows? But what we know is kind of, we have phenomenal information about where we are now. So regionally, in terms of percentage increase, it's higher here and in some of those areas, specifically on groundwater, where there's not a moratorium in place. No increase in groundwater out of the Florida and in the lower Flint because there's been a moratorium in place for the last 12 years. At some point, the resource reaches its capacity to support use, right? I don't think we're there. I think the Florida specifically is such a remarkable resource that it has a lot to give us most of the time, maybe not all of the time, right? But the good thing is I think we are in an environment that does, my previous slides notwithstanding, provide us enough water to bridge those gaps to where we can continue to see growth. There's opportunities for new properties coming in. I think we're in a position to remain dynamic. Like I don't think the conversation around ag has to be, okay, you have to stop doing something, I think we can continue to grow, just be smart about it.
I've got a couple of comments about that. Does anybody remember what the state's population was when we started this process? Does anybody remember? About, huh? No, we started. Yeah. So, there's a couple things. First of all, we've doubled our population. Almost doubled. We had about 5 million people, 5 million people. Now, that many people live in Atlanta. Actually, more than that.
About 6.
And we're just making up the fringes. The state budget at that time, I believe, was about $18 billion. $18 billion. 18 to 28, about. The state budget this year, because of the population growth, I'm sure, $36 million, or $36 billion. So, a point is, agriculture has to grow for those things to happen, right? For people to come here for things. So it's gonna continue to grow, and it's very hard to forecast because those are unforeseen. And the other things that are unforeseen is like, as they have more water issues in out west, as far as ownership and things, people are looking at moving those crops to where, to our areas. There's people growing things that we used to not grow here. And so I think you're gonna get those things. The last thing I'll mention is on the downside, on the negative, we still have an in-gun shut-off problem, in my opinion. It's pretty hard for your neighbor to drive by, watch you pumping out the groundwater on the highway. We did a really good job for that for a little while, I feel like, especially when we first went to when it was all a problem, but we went to the high efficiency heads, and that is overall efficiency has gone way up, there's no doubt, but the in-gun shut-off situation is not.
Yeah, y'all turn your handguns off, even if it's just for optics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, I think it was the 12 drought, we had about 30 wells go dry in Hill County. And most people, the average citizen doesn't know this entity exists, right? And there's an upside to that. I feel like, nothing against your government folks, because I was one once. But, government should kind of be out of sight, out of mind. If you having to think about your government, we're probably doing something wrong. The only time I had people come and say something to me about a water issue was when they were having to drill their well down and somebody was pumping water on my highway. They're like, man, that burns me up. I'm having to add 30 feet to my well, and my next door neighbor who's pulling it down is out there watering the highway. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you about that. They was like, what y'all gonna do about it? I don't know. What's it? Well, but our farmers have done I think the thing that, I didn't want you to run lawnmower, but I think you can't overstate how much better the technology is than when we started this. Some of that is, I'm almost positive back to the model. Some of that is our modeling is much better. We started metering. We did more research on, where those, for what crop, where those heights need to be. But there's no doubt that they've done a lot better job. A lot of them are using full automation as far as like putting water out. That software is amazing, and it really helps. Because especially nowadays, it could be raining on one end of your field and never get any water on the other. And you should just run that pivot, whatever. But now they are actually, mapping that out and trying to save water. And electricity's high, and energy's gotten high, so it costs a lot more than that. Anything else before we leave the ag water update? I always like it. It's always been important to this council because it's so ag driven. There's only one. We don't have hardly any surface water permits. We only have one industrial surface water permit. It's not even active. So the majority of the water that gets used down here is on ag. I'm not saying there's not some users that use a bunch. I was in the meat business, the food processing, we use a lot of water. But the majority of it is ag and food processing. this.
I have a similar question as yours from Mark, is I've seen you guys, you never rest on your laurels, right? You've done so much work mapping all the fields, putting the meters on, the center pivots. I think you've made improvements in a lot of the modeling. You coordinate with the resource assessment team and the modeling they do, right? What, like, from a technical perspective, as you continue to look for, ways to improve, I mean, are there 2 or 3 things you kind of have in the back of your mind that you would take on next?
Well, I mean, with my farmer hat on, in the field, I still think we've made a lot of headway in the technology that's available, and there's been pretty good adoption. I still think that's an opportunity for growth in terms of adopting those variable rate irrigation practices that I think is what Scott's referring to. Forecasting out what's gonna happen in terms of crop mix and all that is, we can kind of do it, but it's a bit of a swag, right? Because you just never, every year's different. But, so I think adoption of those technologies, continuing to fund the work that's gonna come up with the next thing shouldn't be lost. Like, we don't need to rest and say, well, we figured out how to do variable rate, and we know how to get in-gun shut off, and, we've metered everything, so we can stop. But that's obviously not what I'm advocating for. So continuing to do that, given how much ag means, not just in terms of water use, but to the economy down here is important. And in terms of finding the gallon, I'd certainly encourage those 2 things. And then just get more folks involved, right? I think would be.
Maybe
the area
AI can shut off the in-guns.
Yeah.
One thing I think will advance too is application of fertilizer, especially the more expensive it's gotten, and that's directly related to how much water you put on.
Regulated water quality.
If you don't just broadcast fertilizer, you can also taint your water that way. And I will say this on a parting note, I have always felt like our groundwater models that we get and the ag forecast have always been the most useful to me and probably the most accurate. Because, we live in an ag area, everybody wants to know the ag forecast.
Yeah, and I can tell you, Georgia leads the way on a ton of this. I mean, I know y'all go to other water meetings too. Georgia's done stuff, we started doing stuff 20, 25 years ago that most of the rest of the country isn't doing now. And so we're way ahead of the game.
Yeah, I always make that comment because we help with state water planning all over. And,
Sure.
There are states that don't have water plans for one, and some that do, and they only update them every 15 or 20 years.
One of those shift plans.
So the 5-year interval to update the plan is huge. Just
It's a
that
big deal.
commitment alone.
Big deal.
All right, guys, it's 12 o'clock, it's a little after actually, but we got lunch over here and we have enough for everyone, so help yourself.